You murdered your father. You castrated him. I never intended to kill him.
This is Brigitte Harris, who cut off her father's penis, handcuffed him, gagged him with a towel, and ended his life. However, she received widespread support from public figures, including Senator Chuck Schumer and State Senator Eric Adams.
I felt she should be let free. I felt that she had enough. She's been abused all her life, and it's time for her to be able to get a fair share in life.
Who is Brigitte Harris, a killer driven by vengeance, or a broken daughter pushed to the edge by years of abuse? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated. What followed was a disturbing and twisted story. Viewer discretion is advised. Brigitte Harris was born on June 6, 1991, in Staten Island, New York, to father Eric Goodridge and mother Lucy Ann Harris. Both were immigrants from Liberia. Eric was a busy man, running several businesses, including an import-export company, a record store, and a travel agency. Lucy already had 2 children before she met Eric. Together, they had 4 more, including Brigitte. But things were complicated from the start. When Brigitte was born, Eric denied being her father. Soon after, he left Lucy and the 6 kids for another woman. Now a single mother, Lucy struggled to raise her children. In 1983, when Brigitte was just 2 years old, Lucy traveled back to Liberia for her grandfather's funeral, leaving her children in the U.S. But without a green card, she wasn't allowed back into the country. The 6 children lost their mother, had to bounce between foster homes. Eventually, they ended up living with Eric and his new wife. Then in 1990, Eric accepted a temporary job in Liberia, which kept him away for months. Meanwhile, his new wife grew tired of waiting and filed for divorce. The kids were sent to live with their aunt and grandmother in Providence, Rhode Island. But life with their grandmother was no better. In fact, it was a nightmare. Their grandmother was described as cold and cruel. She didn't hide her favoritism, treating the 6 kids like servants while her own children did nothing. Punishment in that house was brutal. Brigitte was often beaten for things she didn't even do. Once, Brigitte got blamed for not flushing the toilet. Grandma dragged Brigitte by the collar, stripped her naked, and beat her so badly with a stick that it left her skin raw and bleeding. But Grandma wasn't satisfied with the beating. She mixed red-hot pepper, water, and flour into a paste, then rubbed it into Brigitte's open wounds. The little girl screamed in pain, but Grandma didn't stop. She poured the burning sauce into Brigitte's private areas. Another time, in a fit of rage, Grandma threw a phone at Brigitte, hitting her in the mouth and breaking her front tooth. When Grandma took Brigitte to the hospital, she claimed Brigitte had fallen off her bike. 4 years later, in 1994, 12-year-old Brigitte and her siblings finally reunited with their mother in Liberia. Brigitte was hopeful. She longed for the love and warmth she never truly felt. She thought things would be different now, that her mother would finally show her the care she had been missing. But within 2 weeks, her hopes were crushed. Brigitte quickly realized her mother wasn't the savior she had dreamed of. When Brigitte confided about the abuse she had endured for years, her mother didn't care at all. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, Brigitte fell ill with malaria. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks, sick and scared, hoping her mother would visit. But her mother didn't come, saying she was too busy attending a church revival. Once again, Brigitte felt abandoned, left behind, forgotten. After being discharged, Brigitte and her siblings went to live with relatives. But life in Liberia was nothing like what they had known. The Civil War raged around them, and by 1996, things became unbearable. Somehow, their mother managed to secure documents proving her children were American citizens, and they were airlifted back to the United States. Back in America, Brigitte was tossed around from relative to relative before ending up in a women's shelter. For years, she went back and forth between Liberia and the U.S., never finding a place she could truly call home. Finally, in 2007, she got her own apartment. She worked as a security guard at JFK International Airport, had new friends, and no ties to her past, especially her father, Eric. She wanted nothing to do with him. But peace didn't last. Not long after Brigitte settled into her new life, her father Eric called. She had spent years trying to escape him, and now he was back, forcing his way into her life again. Eric's health was failing, and in June 2007, he returned to the U.S. to seek better medical treatment. He moved in with Carlene, one of Brigitte's sisters. Carlene urged Brigitte to let go of the past, to forgive him. She tried to convince Brigitte that their father had changed and wanted to make things right. But Brigitte knew better. To the outside world, Eric was a respected businessman, a successful entrepreneur running several ventures. But behind closed doors, he was a monster. Brigitte could never forget what he had done to her. From the time she was just 3 years old, Eric had subjected her to unimaginable horrors. It started as a game. He would bounce her on his knee, pretending to play. But soon it became something sinister. He brutally entered her body. By the time she was 4, he forced her to use her mouth. This left her scarred for life. The abuse continued through her childhood, growing more violent as she got older. It wasn't just physical, it was psychological torment. When Brigitte was in Liberia, he even hid her passport to prevent her from leaving, trapping her in his control. Brigitte tried to seek help. She confided in her mother, Lucy, about what Eric had been doing to her. But instead of protecting her, Lucy chose to tell a pastor. This so-called man of God, trusted by the community, turned a blind eye. He didn't want to get involved. Eric was too respected, too powerful. Nobody wanted to believe the truth. The last time Eric tried to attack her, Brigitte fought back. She was older now, stronger. She resisted with everything she had, and in the middle of the struggle, he had the audacity to ask, "What's wrong with you?" That was the breaking point. Brigitte left Liberia for good, determined to cut him out of her life. But the guilt never left her. She felt haunted by the thought of leaving her younger sister behind. Deep down, she suspected Eric was abusing her too. When she tried to talk to Carlene about it, Carlene always changed the subject. And now, here he was, back in the U.S., trying to mend the broken pieces of a relationship he had shattered. But some wounds don't heal, and Brigitte wasn't ready to forgive the man who had stolen her childhood. Brigitte's sister Carlene invited her over for a family dinner. She mentioned that their father would be there and said he wanted to apologize. Reluctantly, Brigitte agreed. It wasn't an easy decision. After everything she'd endured, facing Eric again was the last thing she wanted. But for some reason, she went. It took her 2 hours by subway and ferry to reach Carlene's home in Staten Island. When Brigitte arrived, the moment she walked through the door, anger and disgust hit her like a wave. There, sitting in front of her, was Eric, bouncing her young niece on his leg, just like he used to do when she was a child. The sight was like a slap to the face. Memories of her own trauma came rushing back. And then Eric said something that pushed her over the edge. He announced that he wanted to take Carlene's daughter back to Liberia with him. Brigitte was furious. There was no way she was going to let that happen. She loved her nieces and couldn't stand the thought of them going through the same horrors she had endured. She confronted Carlene, demanding to know how a mother could even consider allowing this. But Carlene didn't see things the same way. In her mind, Eric was just an old, sick man. She didn't believe he was still capable of doing what he had done to them as children. But Brigitte wasn't convinced. She couldn't shake the flood of flashbacks, memories of the abuse she suffered at the hands of Eric and even other relatives. He had to be stopped. But how? Brigitte thought about going to the police, but after doing some research, she learned that the statute of limitations had expired. There was nothing they could do. Desperate for a solution, she scoured the internet, searching for any story that might give her an idea. That's when she came across the case of Lorena Bobbitt, the woman who had famously cut off her husband's penis after suffering years of abuse. Suddenly, everything clicked. Brigitte knew what she had to do. On Wednesday, July 25th, 3 days before she would see her father again, Brigitte set up a camcorder, aimed it at herself, and pressed record. Her voice was calm but serious. "My name is Brigitte Harris, and this is the story of my life. Well, not the whole thing, it would take too long. Just a summary of why I'm doing what I'm about to do, why I feel it has to be done, why I waited this long to do it. And so you can judge me, but before you do, get the whole story. That's all I ask." A few days later, Brigitte invited her father to her apartment. She wanted to confront him, to tell him that what he had done to her as a child was not okay. She needed him to hear her pain, to know she hadn't forgotten. Eric had spent years trying to convince her that his abuse was normal, that all fathers did this to their daughters. But she knew better now. She started by bringing up the first time he had hit her. Eric didn't deny it. Instead, he sneered. "How do you even remember that? You were only 3 years old, you sick fuck." Brigitte's anger rose. He wasn't surprised by what she was saying. He didn't even try to hide it. Brigitte brought up the time when he forced her to use her mouth at the age of 4. Once again, Eric didn't apologize. He made excuses, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. Then, Brigitte told him the real reason she had invited him over. She begged him not to take her nieces to Liberia. She knew exactly what his intentions were, and she wasn't going to let it happen. "If you really want to make amends," she told him, "this is your chance. Leave them alone." But Eric denied everything, claiming he had done nothing wrong. Brigitte lost control. She started screaming, calling him a liar, telling him he knew exactly what he had done. She realized in that moment that nothing was going to change. Her nieces were in danger, and she had to protect them. While Brigitte stood there encouraging herself, Eric stood up and took a step forward. Instinctively, Brigitte grabbed her pepper spray and sprayed it directly into his eyes. He stumbled, and they struggled. They fell to the floor, wrestling as Eric tried to overpower her. But somehow, he passed out. Brigitte scrambled to her feet, panicked and breathless. She needed a way to restrain him. Searching around the apartment, she found a pair of handcuffs, a joke gift from friends who had teased her about working as a security guard. Without hesitation, she snapped them onto his wrists. Suddenly, Eric was acting like he could not breathe. Brigitte thought he was dying, so she splashed water on him, calling his name, trying to wake him up. He opened his eyes and started screaming. Terrified that the neighbors might hear, she decided to gag him. She grabbed a towel, stuffed it into his mouth, and secured it with duct tape, leaving just enough space for him to breathe. Brigitte was in a state of pure panic now. Her mind raced, filled with flashes of what she had endured as a child. This had to end, now. She couldn't let him hurt anyone else. She pulled down his pants. At first, she tried to use scissors, but they didn't work. Desperate, she remembered the scalpels she had bought online a month ago. She retrieved them and pressed her knee against his windpipe to keep him still. With one swift motion, it was done. To her surprise, there wasn't much blood. Brigitte knew the doctors would try to reattach it if they found it, and she couldn't let that happen. She carried the severed organ to the stove, turned on the flames, and watched as it burned. The smell of charred flesh filled the apartment, snapping her back to reality. Shaken, she turned off the stove, wrapped the burnt remains in a paper towel, and called 911, saying, "A man bleeding to death on 3rd floor of the house." After providing the address, she hung up before giving any further details. Realizing she couldn't stay there, Brigitte gathered the scalpels, pepper spray, scissors, and a few pills, stuffing them into her backpack, and ran away. Half an hour later, Brigitte called 911 again, asking what was going on at her home and if her father was still alive. When the operator asked what happened, Brigitte said, "Forget it," and hung up. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene and immediately attempted CPR on Eric Goodridge, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead on the spot. Upon closer inspection, they discovered something shocking. Eric's penis had been cut off. A scalpel was found beside his body, which investigators determined to be the weapon Brigitte had used. However, that wasn't the cause of death. At 55, Eric could barely walk. Plagued by infected keloids on his legs, as well as kidney stones and a failing liver. He was gagged with a towel secured by duct tape, leaving his nose and mouth partially exposed. But over time the gag had shifted, causing the towel to be drawn further into his throat. This gradually cut off his airway, leading to asphyxiation. As officers combed through the apartment, they found 2 handwritten notes left by Brigitte. One read, "He wrecked my life." The other said, "At first, I blamed myself. Now I know it's not my fault." Meanwhile, 911 dispatchers attempted to contact Brigitte again. When they reached her, she calmly agreed to come to the station, saying she was only a block away, but she never showed up. Instead, Brigitte walked past the police station, heading toward the boardwalk. On the way, she threw away her backpack and scalpel. Moments later, she called her sister Carlene, confessing everything. Brigitte told her she was about to turn herself in, but Carlene, terrified at the thought of losing her sister forever, begged her not to go to the police. Carlene dropped everything and rushed to find Brigitte. When she arrived, she saw her sister sitting in a daze, blood covering her hands and lap. Brigitte had used a scalpel to slash her wrists. Panicked, Carlene grabbed Brigitte's hand and immediately called 911. Brigitte was taken to Richmond University Medical Center, where she spent 3 weeks in the psychiatric ward before being placed under arrest. Carlene Goodridge and Brigitte Harris, sisters born 3 years apart, grew up in a chaotic, broken family plagued by infidelity, abandonment, sexual abuse, war, and now, murder. As the older sibling, Carlene had always been a mix of enemy and protector for Brigitte. Carlene later admitted, "My sister always wanted to talk about it. She wanted help. She wanted people to know. But I wouldn't allow her to talk about it. That's what divided us." After their father's murder, Carlene's silence ended. She became Brigitte's fiercest advocate, launching a campaign named Save Brigitte. Within 36 hours, she secured high-profile defense attorney Arthur A. Dalla and publicly revealed that both she and Brigitte were victims of a pedophile father who had repeatedly raped them throughout their childhood. She said, "The only reason I can talk about this now is because my sister needs help. I need help. It started when I was around 4 years old and went on until I was about 12. For my sister, it started when she was just 3 and didn't stop until she was almost 18. She carried this burden by herself for so long while I stayed silent. I knew what she was going through, and I did nothing. And now I have to live with that." In less than a week, Carlene set up a defense fund, organized press conferences, and rallied supporters. Speaking at a candlelight vigil and on the Montel Williams show, she declared the murder of their father as karma. Carlene said Brigitte got revenge by cutting off his genitals and killing him. But what the world needs to understand is that this wasn't about murder. This was about a lifetime of pain, of suffering, of being brutalized by a man everyone respected, but who was a monster to us.
She got revenge by cutting off his genitals and murdering him. Tonight, the other sister, Carlene Goodridge, is taking a brave stand against her dead father.
Monstrous man.
Preyed upon her, a charge Harris's sister says she knows is true because she also suffered a childhood of being by her father.
Thanks to Carlene's tireless efforts, Brigitte garnered public support, including endorsements from Senator Chuck Schumer and New York State Senators Eric Adams and Dianne Savino. Arthur A. Dalla, Brigitte's attorney, made it clear that this case was about more than a gruesome crime. It was about a survivor reaching her breaking point after years of systematic abuse. He said, "What the evidence will show is that Brigitte Harris was the victim of regular sustained sexual abuse by her father from the time she was 3 years old until she was nearly an adult. She didn't just break down one day. She broke down a long time ago. And this was her cry for help." The defense argued that Brigitte wasn't a cold-blooded killer. She was a broken woman, someone who had spent her entire life suffering in silence and was now calling out for the help she never received. Anyone familiar with the criminal justice system, or even anyone familiar with life in New York City, can see that this is someone who has been through hell. She needs help, not punishment. But not everyone was on Brigitte's side. Some family members publicly refuted the abuse claims, choosing to stand by Eric's reputation. They disowned Brigitte and those who supported her. "She had years, plenty of time, to speak up if this really happened," one relative said. "Why didn't she do something about it back then? I don't believe a word of it."
I don't think her father molested her. Even if he molested her, she had all rights, all many years to get up and do something about it or say something.
Despite the backlash, Carlene stood firm in her support for Brigitte. She needs to be heard. For once in her life, she needs to deal with what she's been through in a healthy way. She needs help, not condemnation. 2 years after being arraigned on second-degree murder charges, Brigitte Harris went to trial in September 2009. Taking the stand in her own defense, Brigitte explained that she had researched the 1993 case of Lorena Bobbitt, where a woman cut off her abusive husband's genitals. Brigitte argued that her motive wasn't revenge, it was to take away her father's weapon, to stop him from hurting anyone else, especially her nieces. She believed Eric planned to take them to Liberia, just as he had once done with her and her siblings. She couldn't allow history to repeat itself. However, prosecutors saw things differently. They claimed Brigitte's actions showed clear premeditation. On September 30, 2009, the jury returned a verdict. They found Brigitte guilty of second-degree manslaughter, not murder. One juror explained, "None of us felt she deserved a murder conviction, so we agreed on manslaughter." Despite receiving letters from 7 jurors urging leniency, Judge Arthur Cooperman sentenced Brigitte to 5 to 15 years in prison. She had already spent 27 months behind bars and would be eligible for parole in about a year. The sentence angered many. Carlene, Brigitte's sister, expressed her disappointment. "I'm very upset. I thought she should be let go. She's been abused all her life. It's time she got a fair chance in life." The same jurors who had convicted her pleaded for mercy, saying Brigitte was not a danger to society. One juror said, "She's not a threat. She doesn't belong in prison." Another juror added, "If anyone deserves something good to finally happen to them, it's Brigitte." During the trial, jurors listened to graphic testimony about Brigitte's horrific childhood. Brigitte described years of brutal physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her father. She recalled being beaten with canes and belts, suffering severe injuries, and enduring unspeakable pain. When asked how she would describe her father, she responded, "A monster. That's exactly what he was." She recounted how she had lived in constant fear and loneliness, wanting desperately to escape, but feeling powerless to do so. Arthur Idala, Brigitte's attorney, took on her case pro bono. After the trial, he shared how moved the jurors were by Brigitte's story. "After the verdict, they surrounded me on the courthouse steps and begged me to make sure Brigitte got the help she needed. They didn't expect her to go to jail. They wanted her to get counseling and support." Idala promised he would fight for her release at the earliest opportunity. Brigitte's story resonated with many, who saw her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a survivor who had finally reached her breaking point. "She made a mistake," one supporter said, "but after what she went through as a child, she deserves a second chance." In response to the Brigitte Harris case, then New York Senator Eric Adams announced plans to launch an initiative aimed at supporting sexually abused children and reminding the kids that they did not do anything wrong. The senator emphasized that family members who remain silent about child molestation are just as culpable as the abusers themselves. To combat this, his office collaborated with community-based organizations to host parent empowerment seminars, focusing on prevention, awareness, and support for survivors. In August 2012, after serving 3 years, Brigitte was released on parole. Since then, she has worked hard to rebuild her life. She joined the advocacy group Steps to End Family Violence, delivered food by bike for DoorDash, and volunteered with Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, an organization that delivers surplus food to homeless shelters and food banks across New York City. Despite her efforts, life after prison hasn't been easy. In a letter, Brigitte shared the challenges she faced. "I know second chances don't come easy. Not everyone thinks I deserve one. Some family members and friends no longer speak to me. Strangers are afraid of me. Even after I explained my story and provided recommendations, Amazon rejected me for a job delivering groceries. New York City wouldn't even hire me to pick up garbage during the pandemic." She admitted that the constant rejection was frustrating and disheartening. "It feels like, even though I've paid my debt to society, the world continues to punish me. But if you're going through something similar, keep pushing forward. That's what I'm going to do. I will get my second chance at life. I will get my second chance at happiness, and so can you." Brigitte ended her letter with a message for survivors of abuse. "If someone abuses you, let go of the guilt. As a child, it's so hard to understand, but I want you to know, it's not your fault. Someday, you'll know you can heal, you can move forward, and you can take back your life." Brigitte Harris is proof that even in the face of unimaginable pain, survival is possible. Her journey isn't over, but she's determined to keep fighting for her second chance, for her future, and for those who, like her, have lived in silence for too long. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. If there's a case you're interested in, let us know. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.